Welcome everyone to our next webinar. Today we're looking at stress mastery. It's just going to be the tip of the iceberg today. Our depth and knowledge of stress mastery goes so deep. We've got 20 minutes to share with you, so we want to give you a bit of a taste of our view on stress mastery. And after that, if you want to reach out to us, if you've got more questions that you want answered or you want to learn more, just reach out to us at the end of this session. I'd really like to acknowledge that there's a lot of us here in this webinar that come from far and wide. We'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that you may be on. I'm currently on the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and we want to celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal people, their ongoing culture and connection to the land and waters. So Benny Button, we're here on Earth to help people, leaders and organisations live well and have impact. Stress is on the rise in our community and in our workplaces, and this is one of the areas that we really hero with our work. I couldn't be more proud to have a business partner than Dr. Adrian Medhurst, who's going to be your main facilitator today in this experience. As we said on the introduction, have your chat window open. The more you participate in this session, the better for everyone. So over to you, Adrian.
Thanks, Troy. So it will be an action-packed 20 minutes. There really is a lot that we can explore when it comes to stress. And so we're tip of the iceberg, as Troy said. That being said, we're actually going to accelerate through and just give you as much as we can in today's session. I don't want that to provoke its own stress response though. So at the tail end, after we've engaged with and absorbed as much information on principles and practices as we can, we'll actually close with a practice just to really center and recharge ourselves. So this image may feel a little familiar, and certainly the message about stress and confusion, the times that we're in are stress provoking. That's true. There's a lot of changes that have been happening, some significant disruptions, the impact on us in terms of our physical and psychological well-being, and key elements of our well-being have been threatened. And so let's not trivialize that. But this session doesn't need to be doom and gloom either. Instead, we can recognize that when there are challenges, when we do encounter adversity, that if we can bring the resources and the mindsets to engage skillfully with the challenge at hand, we can navigate our way through and in fact learn and grow as a result. But some stresses are traumatic and distressing, and so we need to have the skills and resources full to look after ourselves through challenging times. This image here is just to sort of illustrate in as basic form as we can how stress arrives for us. It's typically spoken about as a mismatch between the demands of a particular situation and the resources that we have to cope with those demands. So if the demands are great, if the challenge is huge, if there's something significantly difficult and we don't have the resources, the skills, the time, the energy, the headspace, if we can't cope, then we experience stress. If we feel threatened, then we're experiencing stress. And so when we look at what's going on right now in terms of the modern demands of work and life, we can see that even before COVID-19, things were busy, 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 and the pace and pressure of life was intense. And so that demand, when not met with the resources, the energy, the headspace, led to a level of stress. But when we add to that ongoing changes in our environments, in our industries, in our workplaces, and the challenges that come our way, the problems we need to solve, if not met with the resources, again, we're stripping out our buffers and feeling stress. The work and life juggling act, because this is not just about the busyness of work and the changes and challenges there, but our work and our life. We have obligations and opportunities to invest ourselves in our lives outside of work, and we're trying to get it all done, work and life, these overcommitted schedules, and it can be stressful in and of itself. We then add the demands of COVID-19. which include changes and disruption to the flow of our typical work life, needing to accommodate and work with new technologies. And this can create more of a load and demand for us. And it's also true that on the other side of the scales, the access and availability of resources that we need to cope. So feeling well resourced, having the capacity to actually address these challenges, that too is the other side of the equation that's been challenged. So access to resources in our workplaces, access to relationships for support, access to food that we need, and other services that we are familiar with that help us to function effectively and feel good. So this mismatch and imbalance has been amplified as a result of what's going on in COVID-19. And if we're only looking at the resources from our work or job perspective, and we're neglecting to look at our personal resources, how we can invest in our well-being factors to look after ourselves, then again, we've got an opportunity to really prioritize and hit home what we need to practice and the routines we need to stabilize for ourselves. When we encounter challenges, and our current situation really calls for this, and this is another basic model just to show us the different strategies that we can employ in order to cope with difficulties. But when we encounter a challenge, we can draw a circle, and into that circle, think about and even record for ourselves, what are all the things that you can control and influence right now? With the challenge at hand, what are the things that you can control? And for those things, our best stress and resilience coping strategy is to look at the problems, generate the solutions, and implement them. Sounds very simple, and it's because it is, because these are the things that you can control and influence. So once you've recorded them, identify where the problems are, come up with the solutions, and put them into action because you have that capability and autonomy. The harder part, and this is where people tend to struggle a lot, is when there are things that are outside of your ability to control or influence. And so when presented with a challenge, what can you control, what can you influence, and what can't you control and influence? And for those things, the strategy that we need to put into place is to really understand what is our mindset towards these components? What is our psychological response or reaction? How does it trigger thoughts and emotions? And for us, it's about looking at how do we handle our mindset and psychology to really acknowledge, accept, and even let go of things that we can't control and influence. Looking after ourselves so that we're not adding that additional demand and burden when there's actually nothing at this point in time that we can do to control or influence it. So that's just a really basic snippet of a couple of different ways of understanding stress and things that we can and can't control. On to today's little bite-sized component, and it's on stress mindset. So we're going to get into what stress is and our mindsets towards stress, and hopefully from today's session we'll have a different point of view, because the prevailing message about stress is that stress is killing us. And you're probably dialing in for more of a positive and uplifting session. But in the media and from research, we're hearing time and time and time again the debilitating impact of stress. And if we're not handling it well, then it's killing us. And it's an unfair statement. Perhaps something more like this is more appropriate. It's actually our relationship and responses to stress, if we're not skillfully handling and managing it, that is leading to depletion and dysfunction and yes, for some, premature death. However, that too is incomplete. We can change our relationship and responses to stress. We can work with it more skillfully. We can harness what stress is for and capitalize on it for our own effectiveness and growth. So we've seen this demand to resource mismatch, creating the conditions for stress. When we feel stressed, there is an activation response in terms of our neurophysiology. Our nervous system kicks into gear. And we get into a state that activates and fuels the body and mind to work through something that's been perceived as challenging. And you can see in our description here of the stress response, the activation response, not needing to call it fight or flight, but instead seeing it for what it is activating us to get into a state of body and mind fueled to engage with and work through a perceived challenge. So it's a good thing. It's there to help us. It's there to save our life, not to make us sick. Situations like this really call for our stress response. So living legend Mick Fanning, as you can see here, in the event of a clearly perceived immediate threat to his survival, the stress response fuels him in body and mind to engage with and work through the challenge by punching a great white shark in the back and getting out of the water. This is an incredible use of the stress response because it is there to save our life. However, 99% of the times that we're triggering this stress response, there is not actually a great white shark in our immediate environment. Instead, we're triggering this stress response chronically based on the assumptions and stories and thoughts that we're having about stresses that aren't even there. And as a result, we're creating more wear and tear on our body as a system when we're experiencing our stress in that way. Situations like this, when we're in the car and we're experiencing road rage and feeling aggressive and frustrated because that person didn't give you a thank you wave. And maybe we're spending less of our time on the roads now because we're all in isolation. So perhaps this rings true for you a little bit more.
One per person.
So the question, where's the shark? Is this a real stress, or is this perhaps an amplification of stress because of our perceptions? We feel under threat. We feel like our resources are being taken away or stripped from us. And what can happen as well when we're experiencing stress and people around us are as well is that this effect can get contagious. Our emotions do spill over to each other's experiences. And we've seen this playing out, and apologies if this image had an effect on you, but it's just to show that there are so many reactions and responses that people are having right now. Some of them can be counterproductive for the individual, but they can also spill over to influence others as well. We need to look after ourselves. We need to look after each other through these challenging times. And we need to understand and get perspective on the different types of stresses and challenges that we face. So stresses and challenges, I want us to really understand the different types of stress, and then we'll get a bit of a working understanding as to what's going on across the group that's here with us today. So the type of stress, physical, psychological, illness and injury. I want to highlight here that the mind and body are interdependent. There is not one and then the other. They influence each other. And so if there's something that we're experiencing that's a stress for us physically, injury or illness, there will be consequences for us psychologically, for the mind. And the same is true in reverse. If we're experiencing a psychological challenge, there will be consequences for us in our body, in our physiology. The area of stress, our work, our finances, our relationships. Now, this gets messy because these are all interrelated. They influence each other. There is spillover. Work, finances, relationships. We're social creatures. Relationships matter. But we're under stress now in terms of our work and home rhythms. The duration of stress. How long does it go for? Is it an acute stressor that's resolved very quickly? Is it episodic, as in it rolls through periodically? Cycles on seasons or weeks or some other time period? Is it chronic, where there's been a significant or even small level of stress, but the thing with chronic is it's over a prolonged period of time that we're experiencing that dysfunction or wear and tear. Now, what's underemphasized in the area of stress is the positive stress that we experience. We might call it challenge stress or eustress, as it's called in the science, where learning and growth occurs. Because when we're learning and when we're growing and getting outside of our comfort zone, acquiring new skills and so forth, that is stressful. But in the fullness of time, in the immediate term or the longer term, because we're learning and growing, we would see that as a good stress. And at the organizational level, change and innovation can be challenging and stressful, but it leads to useful progress. And so as a result, whilst it's stressful, it can be very beneficial. And you'll have your own experiences of that. But what I'm wanting to know for you today is what triggers stress in your life and in your work, and what is the impact? So I actually want you to grab a sheet of paper if you've got one nearby, or just record a little mental list. What triggers stress in your life and in your work, and what is the impact? So get your brain thinking, what triggers stress in your life and in your work, and what is the impact? Now, this is a part quick-fire self-reflection exercise and part me needing to illustrate an important point. So I'm actually going to skip to the next slide. What I want you to do is open your chat channel, and I want you to type either negative or positive. What, in terms of your mental checklist, or if you're writing it down, were the examples of what triggers stress in your life and in your work, and what is the impact? Was it a negative list? Was it examples of negative stresses, or did you write about positive stresses? And I'm really, really grateful for the honesty. We're seeing mainly people saying negative, negative, negative. We went straight to the negatives. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with you for doing that. We have in what's called a negativity bias. And as a result, for most of us, even seeing the word stress, it just conjures up all of the embedded knowledge that we have, that we've been entrenched to believe about stress being bad. So we see the word, what triggers stress, and we immediately go to the bad. And when we're thinking about stress and the impact on us from an evolutionary perspective, if something is a stress or a threat, then it gets our attention. And so we don't tend to think about positive stresses, even though on the very previous slide and in the session so far, we've been talking about positive ways that we can view stress. For some of us, we might have written down some positives, and that's good that you've started to bring on some of the principles that we've introduced so far, but we're going to double down on that now. Stress is harmful and should be avoided, reduced, and managed. Or stress is helpful and should be accepted, utilized, and embraced. Now, this set of questions was brought into some research over in the United States that led to a real boost in our understanding of stress mindsets. And I'm just going to fast forward a little bit, because in research that investigated a population of over 30,000 people, they looked at how much stress people were experiencing and what their view of stress was. Was it that they believed that stress was harmful and should be avoided, reduced, and managed, or that stress was helpful and should be accepted, utilized, and embraced? Now, at 8 years follow-up, this longitudinal study found that there was a 43% greater likelihood of premature death for one of those two groups. It was the group that believed that stress is harmful and should be avoided, reduced, and managed. In fact, when looking at the proportion of the population that even expressed the highest levels of stress, if they believed that it should be accepted, utilized, and embraced, they had the lowest premature mortality risk factor. So what it goes to show us is that our mindset matters. I'll just let you digest these visuals. I'm imagining there was laughter, at least to the comical, the comic on the left, but it does show us that our perspective, our lens, the way that we use our mindset is key here. And so what we learned from this research is that the mindset that people bring to stress, whether they think it's bad or good, whether it's debilitating or whether it is helpful and enhancing the way that people function, has a huge impact. So they brought this research, they brought these principles into an experimental study. This is back in 2013, where a group of employees in post-GFC environment were provided with two different videos. One video was provided to one group, and it was a 3-minute video on all the ways that stress is debilitating for health, well-being, performance, and so forth. The second experimental group got the stress is enhancing video, all the ways that stress was helpful for health, well-being, and performance. They followed up in just a couple of weeks, and this goes to show that changing our mindsets can pay off very quickly. The stress is enhancing group over the following weeks had fewer expressed health problems, reduced absenteeism rates and sickness at work, increased engagement levels, and improved performance. So the flow-through effect of counterbalancing our existing and outdated debilitating mindsets to start to really practice engaging with the enhancing effects that stress can have when we capitalize on them can lead to some immediate benefits. So mindsets, what are they? They are quite literally settings of the mind. They are settings that guide how our mind focuses its attention, where we choose to focus and how we process information, how we form our thoughts and feelings that guide the way we make decisions and take action. It shapes our sense of reality. They are the lenses through which we look at the world and form our worldview, our attitudes, and our beliefs. And so the mindsets that some of us may have about stress at the moment is that stress is an enemy, it's a hindrance, it's debilitating. Stress is bad for me. Stress is hard to manage, as an example. Now, some of these may be true for you or just other people that you know, but we can start to counterbalance them by recognizing that stress is helpful. Stress is there to show you that there's a challenge or a threat, something is demanding that you need to engage with and work through. Stress need not be bad for you. Instead, stress can be good for you. Much like going to the gym and stressing your muscle by doing something that's challenging and stressful, we can actually improve our capabilities, our resilience, our strength by stressing well. And finally, you can get better at stress with practice. We can practice different strategies, including our mindsets, that can help us to tackle challenges more effectively. So in the time that we've got left, and I'm going to motor through this, but I do encourage anyone to connect with us afterwards. 3 mindsets that I would love for you to practice when you encounter a challenge, or at the very least to prime yourself in thinking about at the start of a difficult task or at the start of a challenging day. Stress is a messenger. So stress is helpful because it's a messenger. It's telling you that there's something important, there's something difficult here, and it's sending you the message so that you can engage. Stress is an activator. So beyond being a messenger that you need to engage with the challenge, it is activating and fueling the body and mind. Harness that fuel and engage with the challenge as best you can. And stress is a developer. We do learn and grow as a result of stressful experiences. It can be a trainer in that it strengthens your capability by challenging yourself and getting outside of your comfort zone. And it can be a teacher. Through stressful experiences, we can acquire new knowledge about ourselves and the world, and we can carry that forward and improve our resilience in that way. Now, there are some stresses that are distressing or traumatic. And for those, we absolutely want to recognize the disruptive effect that they can have and to reduce its impact as much of the time as possible. But for 99% of those stresses that could be brought a different mindset to support us, practicing these 3 will be helpful. Practice makes progress. We will likely have some embedded ways of understanding and working with stress, but when we can start to upgrade our mindsets and practice rehearsing and utilizing these new mindsets, we can move from knowing this and intellectualizing it from today's session into being better, skillfully handling the stresses and challenges that we encounter. Cross-training is a really beneficial example here. I'm just going to play a clip from our favorite movie.
Don't forget to breathe. Very important. Wax on, wax off. Don't forget to breathe. Very important. Wax on, wax off.
So some of you might be wondering, why have we got Mr. Miyagi and Daniel-san? Wax on, wax off. Don't forget to breathe. This was a really beneficial practice from Mr. Miyagi to Daniel-san that had him cross-training. Wax on, wax off in the car wash was a way for him to train and rehearse the skill of blocking an oncoming attack. Don't forget to breathe was his message as well. So practicing with our breath mindfully helps us to work through periods of challenge. So we're going to do just that now before we close today's session. We're going to breathe in a way that will help us to calibrate our nervous system. And it's going to be an example of cross-training, because this activity, by training using our attention and our breath, we will strengthen this capability, and we can then use that capability in the situations and tasks of our day that might be challenging. So the inhale breath links with our sympathetic nervous system. It is an energizer. It is the activation system that we spoke about. And the exhale breath influences the parasympathetic nervous system. It creates our relaxation or rest and digest influence on our nervous system. So we can calibrate our nervous system by breathing evenly for a few minutes time. And so, as I mentioned, this has been a fast-paced session, and I recognize we're at time, so let's all take an opportunity to breathe before we close out today's session. The benefits of mindfulness practice are vast, so I'm not going to go through them here. We spend a lot of time training people in mindfulness and the scientific benefits. So please connect with us if you're interested in more, but let's just get on with the practice. This exercise here is one that will help us to connect to our body in the present moment, but it'll also give us an even rhythm for our breathing that will help to create this calibrated state in our nervous system. So I'm going to play the animation here. This is simply what you're going to be doing and following the instructions on the bottom of your screen. So we'll all first breathe out together, and I'll guide you through the first round. We inhale and tap our thumb to index, middle, ring, pinky, space at the top of the inhale. Exhale, left hand. We do the same thing. So we create this 5 count, tapping the thumb to each of our fingers and opening the palm for the inhale and exhale breath. Find a rhythm that works for you, and when you feel ready and you understand the instructions, just close down your eyes. I'll guide you verbally through this first round, and then I'll give you some space to just breathe. So let's all breathe out together. And then we inhale and tap thumb to index, middle, ring, pinky, open the palm for space. Exhale, left hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Inhale, right hand. Exhale, left hand. Find your rhythm, breathe, and I'll see you on the other side in about a minute. Now you can feel free to suspend the tapping and just follow the flow of your breath for a few moments more as you collect in your awareness the state of your body, your mind now. What qualities do you notice in your body? Where's your head at? How are you feeling? When you feel ready, just blinking open the eyes if you had your eyes closed. And just to acknowledge for yourself how you're feeling now, how you're feeling perhaps as a result of the practice. Just bring into chat, acknowledging your feelings and sharing with the other people that we have online still before we bring this session to a close. And it's just to point out that even in a short practice of about a minute or so, we can stop and actually tune into our body and breath and recalibrate how we're feeling and how we're functioning. The tip here as well is to integrate mindfulness activities like this to punctuate your day. So in a day that can feel flat out, much like this webinar has been, it has been fast paced, can we stop and choose to put in a little comma, a pause? Can we take a breath, make some space, check in on ourselves, tune into how we're feeling and functioning? We encourage you to do that throughout your day, between one meeting and the next, one task and the next. And that's really beneficial when it comes to reinforcing and repeating mindfulness practice across the day. A quote that we really love that links us from mindfulness and its practice into our experiences and working with stress. When we practice mindfully breathing, we have more of an opportunity to slow down and create some space to feel and to think about what's going on. And Viktor Frankl and Man's Search for Meaning is an incredible book. I encourage everyone to read it. This quote here rings true. Between stimulus and response, there's a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. What we've been talking about here in terms of stress, stimulus, and response or reaction, when we can practice mindfulness, we can create some space to use and bring in our mindsets to choose our response to challenges and stresses. In that response, we have the opportunity to grow and have the freedom to engage and influence as best we can. So I'm going to hand over to Troy to close our session today.
Thanks, Adrian. Yeah, so just remember that cross-training is so important. We take about 23,040 breaths on average a day, and we need to do more consciously and slow them down. We want to get the population's average well below 23,040. If you want to understand your stress profile even better, there's exclusive access to our Benny Button profiler here. There's a code bite size that you can enter as you're going through that process. So that will be complimentary to you. Ongoing from this, our next session, Adrian, if you could just go to the next slide. We've got leading wellbeing. So if you haven't signed up to our newsletter, please do that. It's on our website. The registration for leading wellbeing session will be available tomorrow. This session is really for people that are interested in workplace wellbeing. You might be a leader, you might be an aspiring leader, you might work in HR, or you might just be interested in wellbeing in the workplace. So this will really focus on the role we can play as leaders in this really important topic. Ongoing from here, go to our website, check out our resources. You can follow us as well on Benny Button. Put that handle into your search and that'll take you through to our Facebook, LinkedIn, and also our Twitter feed. So thank you so much for joining us today. If anyone wants to stay on and ask us a few questions, you're welcome to do so for the next 10 minutes. Otherwise, we will see you next time. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for being here.
So if anyone has any questions now, if you want to stick around, feel free to put any questions into the Q&A panel, which is at the bottom of your screen.
Or the chat panel for that matter, whichever.
And we'll just stick around here for another 5 or 10 minutes, but we get it, it's lunchtime. If you want to go and refuel, do that.
For anyone that is still here, we've still got a few participants on the line. It was a great point that was raised that the breathing exercise in tapping the fingers helps to bring attention to the breath instead of putting our attention on the thoughts that are going on. And that's true. So whether we choose to focus on the process of breathing by tapping our fingers, or we can recognize the sensation of what's going on in our body. The body is in the present moment. The breath is in the present moment. Often our thoughts are off and not connected to the present moment. So it just helps us to stay present with what is and turns the volume down in terms of the frequency of the thinking that might otherwise be happening. So a great call out there. Any questions from the group? We've got a question. Recovery from a stressful episode. According to literature and chronically stressed people, one's recovery from a stressful episode is a lot longer. So, and there's variability for sure. What I would mention here is that we need resources in order to respond to stresses and recover. And if our resources have been defeated and depleted, then it may take longer for us to actually recover and get back on track. When we're looking at the stress-related resources and well-being resources, we can look to literature on homeostasis and the stable and the homeostasis of our psychology. So if we experience a significant stressor that actually depletes us of all of the buffers and resources that we were using to cope, we experience what's called homeostatic defeat. And this can be where we don't just struggle for a bit, we have a catastrophic effect as a result of a significant stressor. It's burnt us out, it has depleted us of our available resources. Now, getting ourselves back into homeostasis can take a while. Investing in the resources that we need to recover is critical. For some, those are physical or physiological resources in the case of illness or injury. And for others, it might be more psychological strategies that help people get their mindsets and headspace back on track so that they can get back into homeostasis. But it's an important point, I think, to call out that the different types of stresses that we encounter can have a different recovery timeline. And so what we need to understand as well is how many stresses are we loading onto our plate? Because there's an additive effect here as well. Just having one stress might be easy to cope with, but we are compounding and compounding and compounding stresses, similar to what I was mentioning up front with the demand to resources being out of balance. And this compounding effect can make it potentially really challenging for people to recover, and it may take longer.
I think also with recovery, Adrian, it's important that we really do think about investing in our physical and mental well-being. So whether it's the food we're eating, if we're exercising, if we've got good muscle mass, if we've got good relationships and a support network, all these things can contribute towards recovery. It's not just stress in isolation and the mental load that it causes. So having that foundation of well-being is really important. So
true. I mean, particularly when you think about where the neurochemicals that we utilize from a stress management perspective, where we can cultivate those through good nutrition and through better quality sleep and through exercise, that's helped. Those lifestyle routines, those well-being promoting routines are helping us to get the resources that we need to prime our neurophysiology and our fuel.
All right, well, we might wrap it up now, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. And remember, check out our newsletter, go to our website, and look out for next week. Next Tuesday, same time, we'll be touching on leading well-being. So thanks,
everyone. Bye-bye.